In the ancient frontier town of Brimhold, where the tavern lights burned warmer than the people's hearts, a young tavern maid named Elara would learn that every smile served with ale carried a shadow behind it. The bent chimney tavern stood crooked at the edge of Brimhold, like a wary traveler leaning on its own wall for support. By daylight, it was no more than cracked stone, warped wood, and soot-blackened windows. But when the sun sank and firelight spilled out through its uneven panes, it became something else entirely. A hive of noise and hunger and secrets. A place where travelers came to drink, to gamble, to forget, or to make sure someone else did. Inside, the air clung thick with wood smoke and spilled ale. The floorboards groaned with every shift of weight, as though remembering every footstep that had ever crossed them. Brass lanterns hung from iron hooks, casting a warm, flickering glow that softened faces but sharpened shadows. And in those shadows, the truth of people's hearts revealed itself far more than in the light. Elara had grown used to the murk. She moved through it with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent more of her life inside the tavern than outside. At 19, she was slight but steady, her brown hair tied into a ribbon that once been blue before smoke and sweat dulled its color. Her hands were quick, her smiles were gentle, and her memory was sharper than most guessed. She could carry 4 tankards in each hand and remember the debts each man tried to forget. But behind her soft voice and polite bows, she observed everything. Everything. Tonight the tavern was more crowded than usual. Storm season was late, and the air outside felt heavy, thick enough to squeeze one's breath. Travelers had arrived from the northern road seeking shelter. Farmers had come earlier than usual to drown the week's exhaustion. A pair of cloaked strangers whispered at a table in the corner, their faces too hidden for Elara's liking. And between it all, the regulars sat in their usual places like roots in the earth, unmoving, yet dangerous to trip over. "2 more for table 3, called Brenner from behind the bar. He was a man built like the barrels he lifted, with a beard thick as a wolf pelt and a laugh that could shake dust from the rafters. He tossed her a quick grin. "You're a blessing tonight, girl. Half these men would be dead of thirst without you." She smiled, though she knew what he really meant. Without her, the tavern would be a battlefield. She carried the tankards across the room, weaving between tables. At table 3 sat Toran and Gaul, brothers by blood, bandits by trade, though they called themselves road escorts with a straight face. Toran's scars ran down his jaw like a map of past mistakes. Gaul's eyes were too cold for someone not yet 30. "Your ale," she said, placing the mugs down. Toran smirked at her, leaning back in his chair. "You're too good for this place," he said as he did every night. "Come sit with me. I'll buy you a whole barrel." "And who will pay for that?" she asked lightly. "Your horse, your knife, or one of the coins you found on the roadside?" A few men nearby snorted. Gaul's jaw tightened. Toran burst into laughter. "Fair enough, girl, fair enough." But their smiles never meant harmlessness. She had seen Toran break a man's arm for stepping too close. She had heard Gaul's knife whisper from its sheath more times than she could count. She moved on, as she always did. At the far end of the tavern, near the hearth, a man in a weather-worn cloak sat alone. He had arrived just before dusk, handing over 2 silver pieces, far more than necessary, for a bowl of stew and a corner seat. His hood shadowed most of his face, but Elara had seen the scars on his hands, long, thin marks, the kind left by blades rather than accidents. Mercenary, she guessed, or someone running from something sharp. He had spoken no more than 10 words, yet every time she passed the hearth, she felt his gaze flick toward her. Not with hunger or malice like many men looked at her, but with a weight she couldn't name. He studied the room as though recording it, measuring danger. And danger answered him with its own glances. The cloaked pair in the corner watched him with too much interest. The brothers at table 3 kept shifting their chairs just enough to see him. Even Brenner seemed uneasy, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over. Elara approached the stranger with cautious politeness. "Is your bowl empty, sir? I can bring you another if you like." His voice was low, calm, but frayed around the edges like old rope. "No, thank you. This will last me." His eyes lifted, gray, sharp, and tired. "What is this place really?" he asked softly, though his tone held no judgment. "A tavern," she said with an easy smile. "No." His gaze drifted to the corners of the room. "This is a gathering of men with nowhere better to be. Taverns like this are the places where hearts show their true shape." Elara hesitated. Most travelers said such things drunkenly or with exaggerated flair, but he said it like a fact, like he'd seen the truth of such places too many times. "You're not wrong," she admitted quietly, "but it's home." He studied her for a long moment. "Be careful tonight." Before she could reply, a loud crash rang from the door. A gust of cold air swept in as a man stumbled through the entrance, clutching his side. His clothes were torn, streaked with dirt and blood. For a heartbeat, the tavern froze in silence, the kind that drops heavy over crowded rooms only when death has followed someone's steps. "Please," the man gasped. "Help!" He collapsed. The tavern erupted. Chairs scraped, shouts rose, men jumped to their feet. Someone screamed that the patrols were coming. Someone else muttered about a beast in the woods. Brenner vaulted the counter to reach the fallen man. Elara rushed to help, pushing through bodies. But as she knelt beside him, cold realization swept through her. The wound was deep, a knife wound, fresh. The stranger by the hearth stood slowly, one hand under his cloak. Toran and Gaul exchanged a glance and reached for their weapons. The cloaked pair in the corner rose like dark smoke. Elara's breath caught. The wounded man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His voice was a dry whisper. "They're coming. Don't trust." His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Before anyone could speak, the tavern's front door slammed open again. A group of armored men stepped in, wearing black and iron sigils of the governor's watch. Their leader, a captain whose armor bore fresh scratches, surveyed the room with hawk-sharp eyes. "Stand back," he barked. "Who brought this man here?" Silence. Elara stayed kneeling, her hand still trapped beneath the dead man's stiffening fingers. The captain strode toward her, his boots thudding hard across the floor. "You," he snapped. "Move aside." She did. Barely. He examined the wound. His jaw tightened. This man was marked. He carried information meant for the governor. Someone killed him to stop him. Murmurs swept through the tavern like rattled leaves. The captain's gaze swept the room. Someone here knows what happened. Someone here is involved. Eyes shifted. Hands tightened around mugs. Elara felt the air turn heavier, thicker than smoke. Toran leaned back in his chair, looking bored. Gaul's fingers drummed on his knife's hilt. The cloaked pair whispered urgently. One of the captain's soldiers dragged a man from his seat, demanding to inspect his knife. Tension wound tight as bowstrings. The stranger stepped closer to Elara. "You need to stay calm," he said quietly. "You knew something like this would happen," she whispered back. "I suspected. And I'm not the only one." His eyes shifted toward Toran and Gaul. She followed his gaze and froze. Gaul was watching her with too much interest. Not lust, not amusement, something